On today's show, we are going to look back at our biggest hits and misses from the 2023 fantasy football season. The point of this exercise is not to victory lap or to self-loathe and be miserable about our misses. It's to try to learn something, to try to make some takeaways from our hits and misses and stuff that we can use going forward. This is going to be a two-part series. Today we'll hit our early round hits and misses. Next episode, we'll hit our later round hits and misses. Let's get into it here, and we'll start with our early round hits and misses. Let's start on a positive note. We'll start on a positive note here, Evan. Big hit for Silva. Silva was way below market on both Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes. And I remember talking to Evan about this before the season, and I was with him, the age model, etc. I wasn't with him to the point that he was where I had full fades on these guys. I guess I didn't really take Mahomes at all, but I did have some Kelce in best ball. He was going middle, late round one, and the result was
he was going middle round one,
and he didn't separate at all. Like, he was fine, but he did not separate from Laporta, Hawkinson at all. He only had 984 yards and 5 touchdowns. Mahomes was even worse. I mean, Mahomes finished as quarterback 11 in points per game this year, which is obviously really poor for him. So, Evan, any takeaways from you thinking back on your fades on Kelce and Mahomes?
Just thinking back about it, I mean, it was, I think I had Travis Kelce kind of lurking between picks 10 and like 13 throughout the process, and he'd get bumped up when another guy would move down, and he'd get bumped down when another guy would move up. But I always just thought that, look, we have an age concern here. We have a onesie position, and I was super high on him the previous season, and I had him at like number 11 the previous season. And I thought it was going to be difficult for him to repeat number 1. I just could never move him into that like number 5 or 6 overall range where everyone seemingly had him. He finished below 1,000 yards for the first time since 2015. He averaged a career low 10.6 yards per reception. He turned 34 in October, and there were just too many red flags for me to move him into that locked in middle of the first round range. To me, he just always made sense, in that 10 to 13 overall range.
So I have a couple takeaways. First, like, when guys are 33 years old and turning 34 in the season and going in the first round, that already makes me queasy, and there's selection bias on this. Guys who make it to the NFL and last until age 33 are like freaks of nature, right? And Travis Kelce is certainly that. But you start to get a little bit queasy. On the Mahomes one, though, I think there's a better takeaways. I mean, it's hard for Mahomes to compete with Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson and these rushing quarterbacks when he's not doing it. 389 rushing yards this season for Mahomes and 0 rushing touchdowns. The yardage was like in line with the projection. I think we had him for like 2 to 4 rushing touchdowns. But when you don't have that big rushing projection, it's hard. Now, Mahomes has it in him. We saw it in the playoffs. We saw it in the Super Bowl, but he just doesn't run like that during the regular season. We had tons of wide receiver concerns. We had concerns about Travis Kelce's age, and we had concerns that the team was just going to play differently, and it played out massively that way. Their defense was awesome. They played more ball control. They played slower, and Mahomes didn't have to throw for 5,000 yards for them to have a reasonable season. So the Mahomes fade was one, like, people were taking him above Josh Allen, above Lamar Jackson, above Jalen Hurts. I thought that was flat wrong. And I think that's a takeaway we can have going forward. Quarterbacks who can't run need to be absolutely massive in both volume and efficiency to match.
Yeah, and it was going to be difficult for him to get there from an efficiency standpoint. We knew that there were question marks about the receiver core entering the season. We knew that there were question marks about Travis Kelce, being as he was going to be turning 34 in the middle of the year. And I mean, look, design runs. I mean, they'll let him run on an RPO. He had a big run on an RPO in the Super Bowl. But design runs are just not a part of Andy Reid's offense, and that makes all the sense in the world. We've seen Patrick Mahomes suffer injuries on a sneak. I mean, they don't even sneak him, So, and I mean, how many sneaks for touchdowns to Jalen Hurts? Jalen Hurts didn't even have a good season in real life, really, or at least it was well below his previous standard, and he still crushed Patrick Mahomes from a fantasy standpoint. Lamar Jackson was, his touchdown rate was very low throughout the season until that the game against the Dolphins late in the year, and he still wound up beating Patrick Mahomes. So
Yep.
yeah, it was a good call. It was a good
Okay.
call.
Let's go to a miss before we get back to a hit. A miss, and this is mostly on me, man. I was taking Tony Pollard every time he got to me in the second round. Every single time. And even at the end of the process, there were some drafts I looked back at, and I took Tony Pollard like 11th overall or 12th overall. And man, he didn't end up with his numbers being that bad. He went over 1,000 rushing yards. He caught 55 balls. He scored 6 touchdowns, but he never had explosive games. And maybe the miss here for me was extrapolating smaller samples into a feature role. In other words, the narrative around Tony Pollard right now is that he's an awesome feature change of pace back. He was Ezekiel Elliott's awesome change of pace back, but when they asked him to the feature back, he declined massively. Now, you can say that for some guys, but I can point to a lot of guys, Evan, who were change of pace backs who ended up being awesome. I mean, Chris Johnston was behind Lendale White. Austin Eckler was behind Melvin Gordon. I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs, would you want to be low on Jahmyr Gibbs if David Montgomery went down? I wouldn't want to be. So I'm hesitant to say that this archetype of player, a guy who is really good in a change of pace role, gets the feature role, and I want to be low on him. I still feel like I want to be high on them, but the Tony Pollard thing went so bad that I'm questioning myself. So what do you think happened with Tony Pollard, and any takeaways for you?
I missed on him big time too. So when the news kind of came out that he was going to be all systems go, and he was all systems go throughout the offseason, but when news came out that he was going to be all systems go for training camp, zero limitations, coming off of that fractured fibula and ankle, the natural inclination was just, all right, let's smash him up the board. Let's try to get him on as many teams as we possibly could. And I think that maybe the takeaway is, maybe not have that reactionary, re-ranking of Tony Pollard, because I think that he wasn't healthy, and he spoke about this publicly. He wasn't fully healthy until week 11, and then you look at his efficiency from week 11 on, it was very good. It was very good. He also was unable to execute in scoring position at just an incredibly inefficient clip. He really struggled in scoring position, and maybe one of the bigger disappointments was his passing game involvement. He only had 55 catches on a team that threw the piss out of the ball, and he had 311 receiving yards and 0 receiving touchdowns. I mean, that really hurts.
Yeah.
For a guy that really entered the league as sort of like a receiving first back, and for him to not deliver in that area and near the goal line, that really, really hurt. I mean, it's much easier to do this analysis in hindsight.
Sure.
But I mean, but we have answers for why Tony Pollard was, a fantasy bust.
But that's kind of my point. Could we have seen it coming that he would struggle at the goal line? Because people are saying, "Oh, he's so small," and I don't think we could have seen it coming that he would struggle so bad at the goal line. What do you think there?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's not about being small. Austin Eckler led the NFL in touchdowns in 2021 and 2022. And he's smaller than Tony Pollard. It's not a size issue, I don't think.
Right.
I think it's to an extent it's a small sample, good or bad fortune.
Yeah. So my point is going to be, going forward, people are going to try to extrapolate this Tony Pollard season out to other guys in the same situation. Change of pace guys who are really good, who become feature backs. People are going to be like, well, remember Tony Pollard, he couldn't do it. I think I still want to be on this archetype. For example, if David Montgomery blew out his ACL tomorrow, I would want to take Jahmyr Gibbs in the top 5 of drafts, even though people are going to say, well, he won't be as good in the feature role. All right. Let's go to a hit. Back to another hit. This one, man, I wasn't really with Silva on this. Silva had a big fade on Bijan Robinson. I never thought in a million years the Falcons would take Bijan Robinson 8th overall, only to give him 12.6 carries per game, only to give Cordero Patterson and Tyler Algier work around the goal line. Now, I didn't end up with a ton of Bijan because Amon-Ra and Lamb and other wide receivers I preferred structurally were going around him. And to be fair, Bijan did catch 58 balls, but you can't argue where he was going 7th, 8th overall in a lot of home leagues was a major disappointment. So this kind of draft capital doesn't come around very often. We're not going to get a running back draft capital in this range this year. But going forward, Evan, what do you think the takeaways are from Bijan, who again was the 8th overall pick in the draft and was going like 8th or 9th overall in fantasy?
Yeah, and he was like a definite consensus top 10 overall pick. He went top 5 frequently, and he wound up barely finishing as a top 12 overall fantasy back. I think that maybe the takeaway is, and like I always thought that they're going to keep Tyler Algier involved. They're going to sprinkle in Cordero Patterson, and Bijan Robinson is just not going to get the workload commensurate with being a locked-in top 5, 6, 7, 8 fantasy pick. And you know that's like what happened. Also, you had concerns about the quarterback play. How many touchdowns were the Falcons going to score? I mean, to me, like the writing was on the wall. I don't want to say, like, I hate to say that I had like a big fade on Bijan Robinson because I had him right around the first round territory. It's just, it was in comparison to where everybody else had him.
Sure.
But I mean, there was writing on the wall that they were going to involve the other backs and that they might not score a lot of touchdowns.
Right.
And that's how it wound up going down.
See, I thought the Falcons were actually going to be good. Like, I did not see this coming from the Falcons.
Your takes on the Falcons scared the bejesus out of me. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. And that was obviously a miss that the Falcons were going to be good. Largely, I think, because of the way Arthur Smith handled it. Maybe because of the way Desmond Ridder played. But regardless, I was also kind of in on Drake London in like round 7, where he was slipping to sometimes. And for both these guys to fail, it's really hard, right? Because I thought if Drake London failed, it'd be they didn't throw the ball at all. And that's what happened. I think the only reason Drake London failed, they didn't throw the ball at all. But then they also didn't get Bijan enough work. It's like almost impossible for both those things to happen. And that is indeed what happened. So yeah, credit to Silva on the fade there. One thing I don't want the takeaway to be is that we should be low on these elite draft capital running backs. Again, we're not going to have one this year.
Definitely not.
But when these running backs go in the top 15, like I want to be in on them. This Bijan situation to me was an outlier with Arthur Smith just being a dolt.
I wonder if I haven't even looked at any ADP stuff yet. I mean, are we going to be able to get any kind of a discount on Bijan or Drake London in 2024?
Not in the sharp, like best ball stuff, maybe in home leagues.
Okay.
Maybe in home leagues. Okay. Fourth hit or miss is going to be a miss for both of us, and it's Ramondre Stevenson. Now, I wasn't really taking Ramondre in rounds 2 or 3 where he was going for much of the summer. But after Ezekiel Elliott was added to the Patriots, Ramondre started going in round 4 and 5, and that's when I started getting him a ton. And I think the takeaway for me is that at the running back position especially, team play matters so much. And that's kind of why I'm frustrated with myself, because I knew the Patriots were going to be terrible. Like, it's easy to say now, obviously, but I've hated this Patriots roster, the way they play offense, their quarterback, everything for the last couple of years. I hated the Patriots, thought they were going to be terrible. No matter how good I thought Ramondre is, how good of a pass catcher he is, maybe I should have just been like, this team is so bad, he's not going to be able to overcome that. So that was kind of my thought on the Ramondre miss. Evan, what do you think of Ramondre? Any takeaways there?
Yeah, I remember when they signed Ezekiel Elliott and he reported to training camp and like they put him in a sweatsuit. It looked like he needed to lose a ton of weight.
Yeah.
He wound up being a very big factor. And when they signed him, I was like, oh, I'm not afraid of Ezekiel Elliott. And that was just me being stubborn. That was a big mistake. Also, he suffered 2 ankle injuries during the season. He had a high ankle sprain in week 13.
Yeah.
And that's going to start to become a theme as we talk about more players. High ankle sprains will just absolutely torpedo a season. But he was a disappointment before that, and you're right. Well, the thinking, the consensus thinking, I think, was that, okay, no more Matt Patricia, no more Joe Judge. Bill O'Brien, can we run like a professional offense, kind of like their offensive line a little bit, entering the season? And it wound up being a terrible offense. The offensive line really wasn't good. Bill O'Brien didn't do anything. They had, they were starting Bailey Zappi at quarterback.
Yeah.
And then you throw in the fact that he wound up in a rotation and got hurt late in the season. Big bust.
Yeah. Yeah. And I completely brushed off Zeke as any type of factor. I remember, I think, saying on the show, I can't think of one thing that Zeke does better than Ramondre.
Right.
But that is assumption of rational coaching, and that is a very dangerous thing, right? Coaches like to give the ball to guys like Zeke.
The also an assumption of rational coaching that I had that wound up contributing to this misfire was that, Ramondre Stevenson is clearly the best player in the Patriots offense. So even if they're not that good, like, this dude should get the ball a ton.
Yeah.
And instead they went with the rotation.
Okay. I want to go to Breece Hall now because similar to Ramondre, they made a veteran addition which shook things up. They signed Dalvin Cook. And much like the Zeke situation, I just wasn't worried. I was like, dude, Dalvin Cook is totally dusted. I still want to be in on Breece Hall. A miss for Silva was being out on Breece Hall. Breece Hall goes on to finish as the RB7 in half PPR. Takeaway for me on Breece was like these clean ACL tears, not the complicated ones like Javonte Williams had. We'll get to him on the next show. But the clean ones like Breece had, clean ACL tear early in the season. Guys are just coming back from that stronger and stronger now. And so not being as worried about that, I think, was a big thing. And then not worried about Dalvin. But man, the pass catching and the ability to do it on his own from Breece was just so impressive all year. Evan, any takeaways for you on the Breece fade gone bad for you?
Yeah, and the fade was looking good after Aaron Rodgers tore his Achilles. And look, Breece Hall was extremely up and down. He had 8 legitimately bad games between weeks 2 and 15. But you're right, that receiving capability, gosh, he's unbelievable as a receiver.
Yeah.
Terrible offensive line, was still able to hit big plays. It was sporadic. I mean, again, he had 8 bad games between weeks 2 and 15, but RB7 overall, you could get him late 4th, early 5th.
Yeah.
He wound up being a guy that you definitely wanted to pull the trigger on.
And he went nuts in the fantasy playoffs too, which made a huge difference. By the way, our first run of 2024 best ball rankings, which are up on the site right now, we have Breece Hall 4th overall. I don't know if he's going to stick there. His ADP is around 6th or so, but yeah, I mean, Breece Hall is going to be an easy top 10 pick in fantasy this year. All right. Hit for me was being on Lamar Jackson. So I don't typically take quarterbacks round 3, round 4. But when Lamar Jackson got to me late round 3, early round 4, I was taking him every time, had him in the perfect draft thing that we did, especially in like 10-team leagues and home leagues where I can win at running back, wide receiver, tight end later on. Lamar just has the potential to be such a separator. And the takeaway for me is not being tied to one strategy at quarterback. Pure late round quarterback, I think, is fine in some spots sometimes. But this year, the way the board shook out and the way that I thought running back and wide receiver shook out, which we'll get to more later, I mean, Lamar was the pick for me there. His rushing ceiling combined with the arrival of Monken and Zay Flowers, Odell Beckham being healthy, Bateman and Andrews starting the year healthy, just such a huge ceiling when you combine that with Lamar's rushing ability. And he was fine for most of the year, not like dominant. In the fantasy playoffs, though, Lamar went absolutely nuke. And on my best ball teams, Lamar was the key to all of them. So yeah, that was like one I was really happy with because normally it's not my instinct at all to take quarterback that early. So being fungible with my strategy there, I thought was a big hit. Evan, any thoughts on Lamar and the way the quarterback position played out?
Just the fact that he took off almost immediately, not necessarily from like a touchdown pass standpoint, but he took off in terms of efficiency in the first year of the new offense. So promising as we move into year 2 under Todd Monken. Career highs in completion rate, passing yards, yards per pass attempt. Had an awesome season that finished, on an upward trajectory and wound up winning an NFL MVP. So definitely a good call by you.
All right. My worst call of the year, possibly, and there were plenty of them, but maybe the worst one was Christian Watson. I mean, normally I don't like to have injured guys on this list, right? Because you can say, well, Christian Watson was hurt all year, but this guy's hamstring injuries, and I just brush this stuff off. And maybe I shouldn't with the soft tissue stuff because he's even come out and said himself, and the Packers have come out and said themselves, they don't know what's wrong with Christian Watson's hamstrings. They don't know how to get to the root of the problem. He keeps pulling it. Guy plays in just 9 games, never really looks right. And to lose on Christian Watson so badly when Jordan Love goes off, I mean, that is pain. That is just straight pain. Because the question around Christian Watson was he's getting this huge quarterback downgrade. Turned out Jordan Love balled out and Christian Watson still failed, got outplayed for a lot of the year by Jaden Reed and Romeo Dobbs, even when he was out there playing. So this one was pain for me again. I think the takeaway for me is taking the recurring soft tissue stuff more seriously when we're talking about round 4 draft capital. And in best ball, like that's where you had to take Christian Watson. I was taking him in round 4 and that was very expensive. So yeah, any Christian Watson takeaways for you here, Evan?
I think another reminder that injuries that occurred during the preseason, because he suffered a hamstring injury in the preseason, those can be particularly scary. I mean, who else are we thinking about this year? Cooper Kupp.
Yeah.
Those are can be particularly debilitating.
Jerry Jeudy.
I mean, he came out the gate. He was on each of the first 6 injury reports, and he missed 3 games, and then he came back another hamstring strain,
right,
and missed 5 more games later in the season. I mean, he's a super talented dude. Like, in the rare instances when Christian Watson is healthy, I mean, he has he reminds me of Martavis Bryant.
Right.
But I don't know. I know that they're going to work to do something to fix this, because it's been a recurring thing in each of his first 2 NFL seasons.
My other concern on Watson taking him so high and being so in on him so high is like he's never going to be a high volume receiver, right? He's never going to get 10 targets a game. That's just not the kind of player that he is. And so between the hamstring and the quarterback question marks and him not being the archetype of a player who gets a ton of volume, probably a bad bet in the 4th round.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to be a really interesting guy in 2024, though. And I know we're not doing 2024 analysis, but now that we know that Jordan Love is a baller, and maybe if they can figure out something with Christian Watson, like he can be a mover in 2024.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with ADP yet for this year, but my guess is that we're going to get him, if we want him, very, very late. Like, not very, very late, way later than we got him last year.
And they have a lot of other young receivers that people can talk themselves into and talk themselves out of Christian Watson again.
All right, second to last one we're going to do here is both of us, Alexander Mattison. Now, this was a controversial one because the analytics crowd, the spreadsheet crowd, Alexander Mattison was like the stereotype, the face of dead zone running backs. My argument against that was that Alexander Madison's volume and the state of this offense, which I expected to score some of the most touchdowns and most yards in the league, it's just going to carry him even if he sucks, right? Even if you think Alexander Madison sucks, he's going to get 15, 18 touches in a really good offense and will let the chips fall where they may. It turned out he was so bad that they stuck with him for a while and he was barely startable in fantasy. And at the end of the year, he just completely lost his role to Ty Chandler. I did not think that was really in the range of outcomes. A lot of other smart people did, and credit to them. So this was a really bad one on Alexander Mattison, especially frustrating because I skipped over so many guys in that range at running back that it turned out to be good fades, Miles Sanders and Cam Akers and Dameon Pierce and all these other guys that I faded, but I did take a bunch of Madison and that hurt. Evan, any takeaways for you on the disaster that was Alexander Mattison?
So he opens the season. It was against the Eagles in week 1, Thursday night. Fumbles twice. Actually, one of them got charged to Kirk Cousins. Fumbles twice. Just a total disaster. That's when the Eagles were like the best run defense in the NFL too. Fumbles again the next week. He had 7 drop passes last season. He had 3 drops previously in his career, and he had 2 fumbles previously in his career. I think he got in his own head. He's actually a really cerebral guy when you listen to Alexander Mattison talk. I think that he just kept making mistakes over and over and over again. It's actually surprising that he kept the job for as long as he did.
Yeah. They were too stubborn. They should have gone to Ty Chandler earlier. They were too stubborn.
Absolutely, they should have. And I like Ty Chandler as a sleeper too.
Yeah.
But I thought that this offense was one to invest in. All the rhetoric was that he was going to be locked in as a 3-down back, and he was,
Right.
but he was terrible, and he kept giving the ball to the other team and just making all kinds of mistakes. And he'd always been like a steady, reliable player to that point. It was a horrible season for Alexander Madison. I mean, it couldn't have gone worse.
I mean, first 11 games of the year, he had 17 opportunities per game. He averaged 17 opportunities per game. If you told me that the running back on the Vikings, I don't care what his name is, 17 opportunities per game for this Vikings offense, and I can get him in round 5 of fantasy, that's kind of a bet that I want to make. He was so outlier bad that Evan outlined. It was just, yeah. So I think the takeaway is that talent matters, and it's even at the running back position. But man, I hate to make sweeping takeaways here because Madison was like outlier, terrible. All right. Last one for the show is on me. Evan disagreed with me on this one. Me and Leone were both had huge DJ Moore fades. I think I took 0 DJ Moore, and that was very expensive. Now, one of the arguments against DJ Moore that I made, which came pretty much true, is that I didn't think this be a lot of volume, like a high volume passing attack. They finished 28th in pass rate over expectation. The thing is, it was really concentrated on DJ Moore. DJ Moore averaged 8 targets per game, which, isn't a ton in today's NFL, but it's more than I thought he would get. And from Justin Fields, 71% catch rate and 8 touchdowns. I didn't think that kind of stuff was possible for DJ Moore with this quarterback play. And I didn't even think Justin Fields was that great, but when he was throwing to DJ Moore, he was great. Again, 71% catch rate on 8 targets per game for DJ Moore. And so in terms of takeaways on this fade and trying to learn from it, I had been on DJ Moore so much in Carolina and it hadn't been great. I just love the guy's talent. And the year that I gave up on his talent and been like, no, the quarterback play is too much to overcome. The offensive scheme is too much to overcome. That's when he buried me. And that sucks. And at the wide receiver position, I want to be betting on talent. And I have always been a big believer in DJ Moore's talent. So that was a frustrating one for me. Evan, I know you disagreed with me and Leone on the DJ Moore stuff before the season. Any takeaways off his really, really impressive year, quite frankly?
And we agreed on the fact that this was not going to be a super pass heavy offense. I thought that Justin Fields would take a big step as a passer. I wouldn't say that he did that.
Yeah. Only when throwing to DJ Moore did he take a step.
Only when throwing to DJ Moore. And DJ Moore he wound up finish number 13 in the NFL in catches, number 6 in receiving yards, number 4 in receptions of 20 plus yards. He had 25 catches of 20 plus yards. To me, it was a bet on talent thing, and his target competition I thought was really weak, and I think that proved to be true. But yeah, I mean, look, I really like it because DJ Moore kind of had a lot of doubters when he was in Carolina, and he proved that he's one of the best receivers in the league, and that's a building block for when the Bears get their new quarterback.
Undoubtedly. All right. That's going to do it for part 1 of this 2023 hits and misses review. I actually really enjoyed this. I feel better already getting this off my chest. We'll be back next episode for part 2. We'll hit on our later round hits and misses. If you guys enjoy content like this, we're going to be trying to do it all off season long. Be sure you hit subscribe on the YouTube machine or whatever audio platform you're listening for. Evan. For producer Luke, for producer Ryan, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.